What's the point of free speech? I don't mean that as a skeptical question. You know, when some people ask, what's the point of something, they mean it as a skeptical question. They say, with a gloomy face, what's the point of living? Or, what's the point of worrying? With a bright face. I don't mean there's no point. There is plenty of point to free speech. So I don't mean my question, what's the point of free speech, to be expressing skepticism. On the contrary, there is plenty of point to free speech, and what I want to do today is talk about what that point is. The thing is, we often don't stop to think about what the point of free speech might be. Often we use the phrase free speech as a kind of mantra, a kind of magic spell to put an end to discussion. Oh, but that would go against free speech, and end of discussion. But free speech has a point, and so I want to think about what its point might be. Now, I'm taking up that question as a philosopher. I'm a philosopher. I'm a professor of philosophy at the University of Cambridge, and I'm also at Newnham College. And as a philosopher, well, you know the jokes about philosophers. How many philosophers does it take to change a light bulb? Well, it depends what you mean by change. This works much better if you have a beard. It always helps if you have a beard. Depends what you mean by change. So when we're thinking of free speech, and when we're asking what's the point of free speech, it depends what you mean by speech. Sometimes when we think about speech, we think about ideas. We cast ideas as the heroes of the story, and we think of a marketplace of ideas. We think of this as this kind of vaguely Darwinian battlefield of ideas, and we hope that the truest and the strongest ideas are going to win out. I think that's the wrong picture. Of course there are ideas, but when we're thinking about speech, we should be thinking first and foremost about people. Speech is about ordinary people having words and doing things with words. What do we do with words? We tell stories, we argue, we describe the world as we see it, we make promises, we make bets, we pray, we bully, we joke, we swear. We do all sorts of things with words. And when I'm talking about speech, I'm not talking about words as things that happen to have meaning. I'm talking about doing things with words. And this is a picture that comes from J.L. Austin, a philosopher who was the founder of what's known as speech act theory. So when we're thinking about free speech or freedom of speech, we are thinking about freedom of speech acts, our freedom to do certain things with words. The first point about free speech that I want to talk about is knowledge. The point of free speech is, first of all, knowledge. That was an idea that J.S. Mill made very famous in his essay on liberty. We need freedom of opinion and expression of opinion because that's the best route to knowledge. So we need to speak freely if we're going to speak our minds to each other, we're going to learn about the world and about each other, and crucially, this is a crucial part of the knowledge, learn about what our rulers are up to. Learn about what the politicians are up to, or as we say in Australia, because I'm Australian as well as British, as we say in Australia, the point of free speech, the point about freedom of the press in particular, is to keep the bastards honest. So, if the point of free speech is knowledge, that's one point. The next point of free speech, because I don't mean to say there is just a single point. In fact, there will be many other points to free speech that I'm not talking about today. But the second point to free speech is empowerment. This means, in part, the political power to rule ourselves in a democracy. Our freedom as speakers, as well as hearers. I was talking about our freedom as hearers, to listen to the media and listen to each other, but also our freedom as speakers to talk politics with each other. Also, our freedom as speakers to say no or to say yes in those very special speech acts that we call voting. So voting is a very special speech act where we say yes to the candidate or the party we like and no to the ones we don't like. So it's a special speech act of saying yes or no, and it's one of the most important speech acts that we can perform in a democracy. Empowerment, this second point of free speech, also means a personal power to rule ourselves. Sometimes philosophers discuss this under the heading of autonomy, self-rule. This includes a sexual freedom. It includes our freedom as speakers to say no or yes. Our freedom as speakers to say no or yes in those special speech acts that we call refusal or consent. And by consent, I have in mind active, willing, enthusiastic consent. So an important speech act is the yes or the no, that is an exercise of our political speech act power. And another important freedom is our freedom to perform the yes and the no speech acts of our empowerment as sexual agents. I said that the second one is about a personal empowerment. It will come as no surprise, and in fact I'm sure many in this room will share this view already, that being personal can also be political. So in fact I believe that both of these speech act powers are thoroughly political powers. And so when we're thinking about the point of free speech, we have knowledge, both as it involves political empowerment and as it involves personal empowerment too. Free speech, understood this way, is not cheap speech. Free speech isn't cheap. In fact, it takes a lot, because you can have your words and not be able to do what you mean with them. And in fact, it takes a lot to even have your words in the first place. Think about it. In order to do things with words, you need the words in the first place. You need to have resources. You need to have concepts that are going to match your experience. You need to have an education. You need to have literacy if you're going to be able to read and write. And so free speech actually takes a lot. I say that because sometimes people think that free speech is just a matter of not having the government breathing down your shoulder. It's not. It takes a lot more than that. It takes resources. When you find someone waxing eloquent on the topic of free speech, it's worth stopping and asking them, what are you doing to make speech real? Are the champions of free speech just as interested in providing the resources that would make free speech real? Are they interested in providing education and literacy? Or are they just interested in this, hands off? I think we need a lot to make free speech real. So I've been talking about speech as a kind of action, a speech act. And I want to talk now about how this perspective gives us another way to think about silence. Maybe you're silent because you're frightened or intimidated, or because when you say your words, you don't perform the speech act that you meant to perform. The philosopher Donald Davidson described an actor on a stage whose role in the play was to say, I have to say this very quietly in this context, fire, I mean it, look at the smoke. So you can see why I have to say this quietly. Then, in the story, he told, a real fire breaks out, and he's desperately trying to warn the audience, and he says, fire, I mean it, look at the smoke. But his words are not a warning. So you need to be able to not only have your words, but also do things with your words. Now, I'm interested in how the speech acts of some people can silence the speech acts of others, by depriving their words of their force, by stopping those words being the speech acts that they were intended to be. An obvious example with political speech would be speech that literally prevents someone from voting. That would be apartheid legislation, where some people can't vote because of who they are. They can say the right words, the right yes or no, but it won't count as a vote. Now, getting back to our other example of sexual speech, sometimes a no might not count as a refusal. And sometimes that might be because of the prevalence of the speech of others that is propagating myths about rape. The myths might be, when a woman says no, she doesn't mean it. Or a woman who dresses like that is asking for trouble. Or a woman who is drunk or blotto has is simply fair game. So I want to ask whether speech that does that is fulfilling the point of free speech. Is it about knowledge? Is it about empowerment? If it's not about knowledge and empowerment, then whatever benefit it might have elsewhere, it doesn't get a free pass when we're thinking about the point of free speech. We can all do our bit to answer that sort of speech. So that's the next thing I want to say, is that there is a huge amount that we can do to stop or interrupt the speech that silences the speech of others. And that's important from the point of view of free speech itself. So I've been asking, what is the point of free speech? I've been saying it's knowledge, it's empowerment, both political and personal, and how those are all mixed up. You've also noticed probably that I'm speaking about this not only as a philosopher, but as a feminist. Now, back to our light bulb jokes. How many feminists does it take to change a light bulb? It's not the light bulb that needs changing. Thank you.